Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabi'a sunnatahu ila yawmiddin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome again to another episode of your weekly Islamic chat show, Guest of the Week, coming to you from Sharjah TV. I'm your host Ismail Bullock, and today, inshallah, we have an interesting topic, and I'm not going to give it away now. I'm going to let you watch it and see as it evolves, as they say. And to do that with me is Ustad Muawiyah Tucker. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to see you. We always get you when you're passing through the UAE, so it's a pleasure to have you on again. So yeah, today we're going to talk about something which is kind of interesting. It involves like marriage and demographics and population. So sounds like a geography class.
Well, the thing is, I'm a big proponent of the idea. I guess everyone is, but every Muslim is by default. But big proponent of the idea that all social ills, all social problems has solutions within Islam. Not that Islam is a sociology experiment, but that Islam gives us a framework. It gives us information that allows us to live the best we can. And I think it's important for people to recognize what Islam promises and what it doesn't. So Islam promises the believers who follow the commands of Islam, follow the instructions given to them by Allah. Islam promises that, number one, we won't be punished in this life, and number two, we won't be punished in the next life. Just like in the hadith of Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where I think Mu'adh ibn Jabal was sitting behind him and said, "Do you know what Allah's right over us is, and what our right is over Allah?" And he says, "Allah and the Messenger knows best." And he said, Allah's right over us is that we don't worship anyone else besides Him. Whereas our right over Allah is that we are not punished if we do so. And then he said, أَفَلَا أُبَشِّرُ النَّاسِ, should I not tell the people this great news? I mean, that's great news, isn't it? If you just worship Allah, you won't be punished. He said, لَا تُبَشِّرُهُمْ فَيَتَّكِلُوا, don't give them the glad tidings because they'll depend on it. But the point here is, this worship of Allah, this obedience to Allah's command, it comes with it guarantees given to us by Allah. Allah's promising us, if you do this, this is what will happen. You won't be punished. But what Islam doesn't promise is that you won't be tested. There's a difference between a punishment and a test. Unfortunately for us, we never know which is which. I mean, you can never know if a car accident is a punishment or a test. You can never know if losing your job is a punishment or a test. What we do though, is that we act in both ways, in both avenues. We act, if it's a punishment, we make istighfar. Hence why, if tragedies happen, if bad things happen to us, as a Muslim, what we should do is return to Allah in repentance, in tawbah. Maybe what we have is punishment. And we ask Allah for sabr with our bala, with our tragedies. So we can act in both ways. Anticipation of the relief of this difficulty, whilst having regret and remorse from our sins and so on and so forth. But the point here is, I want to highlight is that Islam doesn't promise difficulty in life, but it does promise that you'll be punished because of sins if you're not sinful, obviously. So back to the issue of society. In society, there are many things that can go wrong. In a society, in a nation, in a tribe, whatever. And Islam gives us, I believe, and everyone believes, Islam gives us solutions. If we follow them, then at least our tests will just be tests and not tests with punishment. Does that make sense? And what's interesting in the lives we're living right now, we're living in amazing times. I mean, I don't know. I feel it's amazing times. I don't know how you feel, but I feel it's an amazing time in terms of our lives today are so different to how lives were hundreds of years ago. Like, if you can imagine for example, the life of Ibn Taymiyyah wasn't that much different than the lives of Qurtubi or the lives of the scholars before him or after, and it wasn't much different. There were differences, but it wasn't that different. Whereas in the last 100 years, life has changed so drastically on planet Earth. And so many things have been, and one of the things that's drastically changed is information. We have access to lots of information. We can see what's happening globally. In the past, even if for example, there was a ta'un, there was a plague in a certain village or whatnot, you won't know about it unless someone from there travels to you and informs you. You wouldn't know. So as far as you're concerned, everything's good, isn't it? Everything is nice, everything is fine. If another country somewhere else, another tribe somewhere else is going through difficulties, you just wouldn't know. Whereas today, we have access to everything. And from the things we are seeing is, I would say, a social degradation. Society is eroding, it's degrading. I don't mean morally. I'm talking about demographics. So, here's an interesting story. And it's an interesting story. I tell many people all the time, but it's an interesting story. So, when I first became Muslim, I became Muslim in college. So I became Muslim in college, everything changed. I initially wanted to be an astronaut, and then when I became Muslim, I said, no, I want to be a talib ilm. So everything just changed. From astronaut to student knowledge, everything's changed. So when I left college, I thought, let me get a quick job, and I applied to Medina University, and if it goes well, it goes well.
You could be the first ever Medina graduate astronaut. Think of that.
Maybe. It's still a student. It's not
Guinness Book of Records.
It's possible. It could happen still. Interestingly, actually, there was a Saudi, a man and woman who was just in space just a few weeks ago. But anyway.
With actually someone from the UAE as well.
Oh, is it? MashaAllah, yeah. MashaAllah. So yeah, it's happening. So it could happen. Back to the point. So I was doing a temporary job, IT job, before I'll find out, am I in Medina Uni or not? So I got this job in this charity organization. I don't know the name of it, but I was just in the charity organization. I didn't know what it was. I was just told it was an IT job, technician helping, staff. I was like, oh, that's fine. Fair enough. So I went in first day of work. The whole building was mostly empty. I said to my boss or my line manager, where's everyone? Oh, they're abroad doing their charitable work. I'm like, okay, fine, So I'm doing my work and whatnot. And then I met some people, met some staff and whatnot. There were some people here and there. But get to the point, on the second day, because I started to notice certain things weren't looking right. I wasn't too sure. What are these guys really doing? Should I even be here? I was a bit unsure. And then someone sent me a PDF document. And they said, could you help me please with this document? I can't open it. It's not opening for me. It was a simple issue. The dot PDF at the end was deleted. So I just put it back and it was fixed. But I was too curious. I was like, what do these guys do? So I opened the document. And what I discovered was, it's a charity organization that is built on the ideology that overpopulation causes harm economically to the nations that has it. So what they want to do is go to poorer countries, and most of the countries that were listed were Muslim ones, and encourage them to not have so many children, encourage them to delay marriage. And one of the things that they actually do is give out 3 contraceptives to people in those countries to try and encourage them to be more promiscuous, and you can do things without being married and whatnot. The ideology behind this was they're helping them because they are poor, because there are too many people. They have to bring their population down so the wealth that they have, it spreads more. You could say the cumulative wealth gets spread more, or more concentrated amongst those few, and they can become more rich. That was the ideology. And I said to myself, Astaghfirullah, what is this place? How can I be a part of this? So I put the email PDF back onto the email, and I sent it back. And I said to them, this is a problem. I fixed it. If you need more help, let me know. However, I noticed from your document that you noticed some problems in these countries, and you mentioned some solutions. But I feel that maybe some of your solutions cause more problems than they solve. If you want to hear my view, I'm on floor this one, desk so you can come and chat to me. I just being nice and trying to give da'wah, just trying to be nice. So I left that desk and I went to the local masjid and I prayed dhuhr. And after dhuhr, I made istikhara. Said, oh Allah, if this job is good for me, keep me in the job. And if it's bad for me, take me away from it. So I left the masjid, went back to the workplace. As I went into the front door, my line manager said, can I speak to you a minute? I said, yeah, sure. And he sat down in the office and said, I'm sorry, but I have to let you go. Literally, I made istikhara like 5 minutes ago. If it's good for me, keep me in. If it's bad, take me away from it. And as the taslim, as the dua was finished, the dua was answered. He said, I have to let you go. He gave me some advice. He said, look, you know, I know your views, you're Muslim and so on and so forth, and my advice to you in the future, don't write these things down, speak it, but when we write it down, you can't take it back and that kind of stuff. And he said to me, you have to understand is that this organization was built to fight. And he paused. And I said to him, you mean fight Islam? He goes, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I said, okay, cool, fine. I mean, he was cool. He wasn't like, I hate you. He was just saying, this is how it is, and I'm just told to let you go. It wasn't my fault. I mean, sorry. So I picked up my stuff and I ran. And I'm like, Alhamdulillah, I'm free from this job. But the point here is, there are organizations, there are people who are actively out there to do this. To spread, number one, spread the ideology. And number two, practically help, you could say, or facilitate the reduction in the population of the Muslim primarily. And I say primarily, and not only mainly because Muslims do account for the in terms of birth rate, one of the highest in the world. Not the highest, but globally, we as a if you say as a people, the Muslim people have the highest than any other group, you could say. So, what I want people to recognize is what is the message of Islam about this, and what are the virtues, and what problems, you could say, does it solve? How does it help us? So I'd like to bring everyone's attention to a very important hadith. Everyone knows this hadith, where a man came to the Messenger of Allah and said, I want to marry this woman. She's great. Everything about her is perfect, except that she can't have children. And the Messenger of Allah said, okay, as advice, because remember he's asking him advice, not saying it's haram, he's saying it's advice. He said, no, marry someone else. He persisted. On the third time he said, تزوج الولود المودود فإني مكاثر بكم الأمم. This is the basis of this discussion. Marry the affectionate, fertile women, because I am going to be competing with you on the Day of Judgment in terms of the number of the ummah. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to have the largest number of followers amongst all the other ummah. So as we know, some of the prophets that were sent to their people, they had 1 or 2 followers, maybe a dozen, maybe a few dozen, and some prophets had no one following them. But then from the followers of Musa, there was a massive ocean, as I mentioned in the hadith. But the Messenger of Allah wanted a larger one, because he saw as a vision another collection of people that was a large number of people. And we see that today. Muslims are a large number of people. So number one.
Before you go into number one, time for a break. Join us inshallah after this short break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Just before the break, you mentioned that hadith of the Prophet ﷺ said to marry the woman who was fertile.
That's true. So, with regards to the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's very important for us to increase the numbers, to increase the followers, and one of those reasons, one of those benefits is, or one of the means to do so, is to marry those who we do the best we can to have as many women, as many children as we possibly can, and we can speculate as one of the reasons why polygamy is allowed in Islam, because via that avenue, number one, it allows a person or a man to, you could say, support more families. It takes the burden off of one individual to produce many children. Maybe 4 could produce less, but still have many children. And again, it allows us to facilitate this overarching message of increasing the ummah as much as possible. Now, it's important to realize that sometimes in Islam, the hikam, or the wisdom of commands aren't manifest. As in, we know, generally speaking, why certain things are given to us. For example, why we understand why alcohol is prohibited. So, for example, in one of the ayahs that mentioned the prohibition of alcohol, it mentions لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى حتى تعلموا ما تقولون. Don't go near the salah while you are drunk, up until you know what you are saying. So we can already perceive from that statement that being intoxicated, not knowing what you're saying and what you're doing, is one of the reasons why alcohol is prohibited, because you are unaware of your own actions. The human body is a very sophisticated tool. It can do a lot of benefit, it can do a lot of damage. And we need people at the helm, behind the driver's seat, driving this vehicle. Not, it's almost like saying someone's going to drive and close their eyes. You can't have someone driving a car at high speed with their eyes closed, which is essentially what you're doing if you're drunk. So some things we have indicated directly the wisdom. But as
a disclaimer, it's important to mention as well for anyone watching that now, obviously we know that a verse came later, which was the abrogation, or it was the final ruling, which is indeed in alcohol and gambling, etc. Yeah, so stay away from it, just in case anyone.
I'm not suggesting that it's halal, but I'm saying,
it shows that,
it shows there's the wisdom behind it. So, but in terms of having as many children, there are some things which is clear, like we just mentioned here. It says Mukathir bikum umam. He wants to have as many people, but why? Beyond just having many people, is there something more to it than that? Then exactly we can explore that. Also, in many examples in the Quran where Allah references wealth, references what people want and their achievements. So it mentions from the benefits is al-mal wal-banun, so wealth and children. And I think especially in this day and age, there's been a lot of emphasis on the accumulation of wealth, and there's been almost no emphasis on the accumulation of children. In fact, the real message you find across the board is that children are a hindrance to wealth.
Or a burden, yeah. I've seen things, you come across things, you don't have to look for them, but they come up sometimes. It could be anywhere, an article, I don't know, social media, and you hear people saying things like, I don't want kids, I'll just have a cat. But at the same time, what's interesting, and since we are now in this, we are in, and you mentioned in the beginning how society has been degraded, and you said, I'm not talking morally, but we do know, and that's a whole other episode, that in so many ways, societies around the world, some way more than others, are being degraded morally, without a doubt. Yeah. And one of that is this whole, kind of, I won't use the word militant, this extreme kind of feminism movement.
Yeah.
So, this whole, like I said, this extreme feminism is telling women that don't have children.
Yeah.
Be career, make money, live a good life, be free. And we see so many actually who were very, extreme, very big proponents of feminism. They're actually coming back out later when they're like 50 and they feel lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they feel, it's quite sad actually, we don't want to make fun of them. It's actually sad that they turn around and they say like, I wish I would have got married. I wish I would have children. And now they're at an age, it's not just women, even men, but they're at an age now, well, firstly women, they may not be able to have children. They've missed the boat, as they say. And it's also harder to get married. And that's not just for women. If you're a 50-year-old man, of course, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get married than it is if you were younger. So, and this is a problem, people are looking at, like you said, children as a burden, whereas the average person, hopefully, like me and you, and even Muslim, non-Muslim, this is something, a source of joy. It's a wonderful thing. You can't wait to have your child. I mean, that's how it always was.
Yeah, yeah.
Now it's like everything is being, not so many things. We could, like I said, we could make a series of episodes on what's going on in the world, but everything is being thrown on its head, upside down.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is normal has become abnormal, and what's abnormal has become the norm in so many ways. It's really.
But one thing you just touched upon there, I think, is really important for everyone to realize, and just zoom in enhance, you could say. Let's zoom in enhance. You say about women want to go into the work, have their own jobs, have their own independence and feminism. So just to be clear, as you mentioned yourself, Islam supports the idea that women should be treated with respect, we should be honoured and looked after, and have the same rights as a man in many aspects of society. No one's denying that. But what we need to zoom in and analyze is why. Why are they pushing this narrative, and what's actually really behind their message? Is it really about a woman having opportunity to work if she wants to work? Or is it about increasing the tax basis of the country? So this is what I'm saying about demographics. This is where we're hopefully going to get to in a minute. So if you're in a nation of people and you have 2 million people, and these 2 million people, half a male, half a female, for example, if you have women who are essentially, mothers looking after their children, raising the next ummah, the next generation, that means you've halved your workforce. Only half of the population can actually be taxed, can actually accumulate money for the government. Whereas if you say, no, let her work as well, give her freedom, what's really behind the message isn't really her freedom. It's about her income. If she's working, now you can tax her more. Now you can extract more money from her. And they also know that, generally speaking, across the globe, those who spend more out of the genders are women. Women spend more. So if women have their own money, therefore they spend more. Again, more commerce. It's actually a financial decision. It's not an ideological decision. They're not doing it because they love women and want to favour women. It's not to do with that at all.
In fact, one of the main people came out and said, we funded and we pushed the feminism movement. He said, and he was saying he's one of the big players in the world, controlled, media, everything, and said we pushed this not because we really cared. We wanted to use it as a way to tax them and make more money.
Yeah. So it's the thing is, like I said, it's a short term. It's about short-term gains. That's what it is. It's about short-term financial gains. We are capitalizing on their 20, 30-year work life, not thinking or looking about the 20, 30-year retirement life. What is their life going to be like once they're retired? And then maybe they even are saying, okay, if they're retired and they have no children, therefore we can now employ others to look after them. That's more revenue. Rather than me look after my mother, which is not taxable, now they can pay them to do it, and now I can tax that. Same thing in where I'm from, my country. It's actually ironic. You might have for women, for example, maybe single mothers. You find what they do is that they actually encourage her to go to work. And if she says, but I have a young child, I need to look after the child, they'll say, no, you can hire a babysitter. And always, when I first graduated, I was like, why would you do that? Why would you tell a woman to stop looking after her own child and instead let someone else look after her child and force her to work? It seemed like a silly thing to do. But it's actually a very smart thing to do. Why? Because now she's working, that's tax income, and the babysitter's working, that's tax income. You've turned a taxless job, being a mother, to now an industry where you can now have two sources of revenue for the government. So we should really home in on the real source of their dawah. Even that company I was working for, that charity company I was working for, it isn't really about helping these poor countries. It's about subjugation, because they know that a larger population has a larger workforce, and if things continue the way they are, they will do better than them in the long term. But we're going to touch upon that near the end. But I want to move on to the issue of poverty in children. I want to home in on that issue of poverty in children. Like you mentioned, the person who has the person who says, "I don't want a child, I want to have a cat." That statement, "I want to have a child, I don't want a child, I want to have a cat," that indicates the irony of the situation. What's the irony? The irony is they still have an inherent internal desire to look after something.
Yeah.
But they don't want the burden of financially looking after the child. Whereas a cat is more burdensome, actually, because the cat can't reciprocate. Think of it this way. A child, you raise the child, and at some point the child now will look after you. A cat can never look after you. A cat can never reciprocate your investment. if you look at it in terms of investment, it's even a failed investment. Even though you spend more money, technically, quote unquote, on this child, that child will hopefully look after you when you can barely walk. And their children will look after you when you can barely walk. That would actually help you, whereas that's the real investment. So Allah mentioned in the Quran, لا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق. Don't kill your children out of fear of poverty. نحن نرزقكم وإياهم. We will provide for you and them. This is so key. Every Muslim is watching this, or non-Muslim is watching this show right now, should take from this. This is the most important part of the message. But Allah said, don't kill your children out of fear of poverty. We will provide for you and for them. This prohibition indicates, or it is applicable to so many avenues that we see today in society, so many problems in society, and actually indicates a solution to a lot of these problems. So, one thing, for example, we see in society, some societies have actually actively tried to limit the number of children you have. It isn't killing children by having them and then ending their life, but it's a step before that. It's actually stopping them even having them in the first place.
Killing the concept of having children, you could say.
Yeah, it's even more severe than killing them.
I've got to hold you here because it's time for a break.
Yeah.
Join us, inshallah, after this short break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Just before the break, we got to the whole idea. We mentioned the fact that through some of these programs, it's like they're killing the versus killing the children, but it's almost like they're killing the whole concept of having children.
I mean, if you really just sit down in a quiet room and just start thinking about this idea of a war against children, realistically speaking, you see it in so many things. Number one, this idea of, or this promoting the idea that children are a burden, which it isn't. And anyone who's had more than 4 children will know it's not the case. When I say it's not the case, yes, having a child is a burden. Sorry, not a burden, is a challenge. That's the best way to put it. It's a challenge, both financially, in terms of time, in terms of effort. And no doubt, having 2 is double the effort. And no doubt, having 3 increases it. But once you get to 4, 5, 6, and 7, it's not so much. There's this thing called diminishing returns. As in, initially, it's a lot, but as time goes on, the more you have, the less issue it is. Why is that? Because your children are not invalids. They're not just sitting there doing nothing. As your first child, your second child, and your third child grows up, they are now helpers in your home. They now help raise the next generation. To the point whereby I'm sure if someone has, like, let's say 8, 9, 10 children, imagine both parents just died. Guaranteed, if you have 10 children, the eldest are old enough to take some responsibility. Therefore, you've already invested in the future of all of them by the fact you've had many of them. So it's actually easier. For example, imagine, I'm guaranteed anyone who has 4 or 5 children, by that time, both parents can go out and do shopping and leave the oldest one to look after their children. So it's not a burden. Yes, no doubt the first one was challenging because if you wanted to go out, they had to go with you. And if you had a second one, same thing, because they're the same age. But there comes a point whereby soon you can now give tasks. Soon they will now start cleaning the house, doing the dishes, maybe even making dinner. At some point, they now become helpers in the home. And the joke is it's not that you have children so they become your slaves or servant. That's not the case. That's not what we're talking about. That. But part of their training of how to be an adult, they help you. It's almost like a win-win. They win by the tarbiyah, by the learning about how to be an adult, how to take responsibility, how to grow, and so on and so forth. But you win from their tarbiyah because you now don't have to do as much work as you used to have to do. So back to the point of the ayah, don't kill your children out of fear of poverty. That includes even stopping having children, even taking contraceptives, whatnot, actively making effort not to have children because you think you can't afford it. Why do I say this is the issue? Allah says and promises you that He provides for you and them. And even to the point whereby some of the Salaf used to say, they used to increase and get married again to increase their rizq. Look at the opposite. Look how, like you said, look how everything is flipped. In the past, to increase their rizq, they would have a bigger family. Like Allah mentioned that the mal wal banun, they would actually have lots of children. I mean, look at Ismail, had 12 sons. Look at Yaqub, had 12 sons. Having lots of children was a thing. Whereas today is now the opposite. People, they think to have more money, you have less children. Have one or two, and then the rest they will keep for themselves. So this is a problem, an ideological problem, and it's something we need to, as Muslims, remove. Number one, we have to acknowledge internally in our hearts, we don't believe this. We don't believe that having more children makes you more poor. It's just not the case. And number two, practically, through evidence, that's not the case. And now we want to move on to the part where we discuss this about the demographics. Now, alhamdulillah, when I got married into a Pakistani family. So my wife, she has 7 other siblings, so there's 7 of them all together. And I've seen, because I'm from a smaller family, it's just me and my sister, just 2. So I'm the example of the small family, and I'm married into a family example of a large family. And I see the complete difference. On that side, literally, if any one of them need to do something financially, there's all these other siblings that can help them out. If they need a loan, need some help, financial help, need some help looking after the kids, there's so many options available. One needs to go on holiday, okay, I need to make holiday, can you look after the kids while I'm on holiday in some place or whatnot, if they travel somewhere? There's help and support because there's so many of them. Whereas on my end, I mean, from my end, I see how much that isn't the case. My sister only has me, and I only have her, and that's about it. If I'm not there, she only has her husband to depend on. My point is, you can see that large numbers is not a hindrance; it's an advantage. And up until recently, maybe in still many places in the world, it's still taken as a sign of power or a sign of help, because they see practically how else, who's going to till the field, who's going to work and help everyone out when it comes to maybe there's a flood, they need help to move stuff, whatnot. There's lots of benefit. Back to the issue of society, I want to just quickly draw on some of the benefits from increasing demographics. So what we're seeing right now in the world, so when I got fired from that company, that was in the late 90s. And that was when this idea of overpopulation was a big thing. I mean, it still is a thing for some, but it was more of an issue then, or more of a accepted paradigm to many in the past. But today, subhanallah, and this is why this is what increases a person in their conviction in Islam. When you see that in time, the sunnah shows that it's true. Many countries who took the policies of trying to reduce the population are now suffering because of that.
No, they're actually encouraging people to get married.
Now they're paying people to get married.
Paying them, yeah.
There's even a country that there are more diapers, more nappies sold for adults than for children. I mean, we say subhanAllah because it's like, it's a shocking thing to even think about. But that's exactly what would happen. What else would happen if people are not, if more, because the thing is, it becomes a trend. Let's think it this way. In the past, people had 4, 5, 6 kids. You don't go from 5, 6, 4 kids down to 1. It goes from 4 to 5. So you go from 5 to 4, 4 to 3, 3 to 2. I'm talking about averages. You slowly go down. As you slowly have less and less and less, eventually that population, those adults grow older and eventually retire. Now they need someone to look after them. And most countries have what's called a pension system, whereby the revenue, the tax revenue or the income from the young help support the elderly. Now in Islam, that support comes from the family. That's why Islam strongly supports a strong family, encourages looking after your parents, birr walidain, the reward, the doors of Jannah are at the feet of your mother, these kind of things. Because Islam inherently has within it the mechanisms for looking after the elderly. It comes from the children. And what better way to help look after the elderly than to spread the load of looking after the elderly to more people. So for example, my mother, for example, technically speaking, only has me. And if I was to die early, for example, who else is she going to depend upon? I mean, obviously my children as well, and so on and so forth. But I'm saying, imagine I had no children, just me. If I passed away, she's on her own. She now has to return to the state. That's now a burden on the state. Whereas Islamically speaking, for example, my wife's family, now her parents are old. There's 7 children to look after them. If one travels somewhere else, if one person passes away, there's still 5 left. So we see here that within the system of having children, we've already dealt with and solved even the system of pension.
I've even seen, like you mentioned, some countries now are paying them, the citizens, to have children and get married. I've even seen other regions and places around the globe, they're actually saying, come and live in our area and we will pay you some big salary a month as long as you promise to stay for a minimum of like 5 years, and we'll give you accommodation. It's like and some of them are like, for some people, they might like jump at the chance because some of them are some really beautiful scenic places, but because the population, they weren't having children, now they're at a crisis where they have to take people who aren't even from there, they're not natives of the country, anybody who wants to come, just because they need to get population.
And this is what's called the demographic problems which afflict a lot of the Western countries now, is exactly this, because they had the da'wah, they had the vision that, you know, live life to the fullest, enjoy yourself, you know, don't have so many burdens and responsibilities. Let the woman go out to work, let the man go out to work, spend your time being a slave to your boss. Don't worry about family, don't worry about all this stuff. Now time has passed, because this idea was more prevalent in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Moving on 20 years after that, now that generation is now growing older, now they're finding the problem, where now these countries are now suffering what's called, I can't remember the exact technical term, but basically it's the replenishment level threshold. They're not having enough children to replace those who are dying. So basically, the population is now beginning to decline. Even one country, which had the largest population in the world, is now for the first time showing signs of decline, where the population is now going down. And if that happens, if the population starts to go down in terms of number, what that means demographically is that you're going to have a larger and larger older population and a smaller younger population. And that means a smaller number of people to support the older people. So back to the issue I'll just draw some points. So number one, loss of children increases economic growth. How? It does so by the more people you have, the more workers you can have. The more workers you can have, the more revenue the society makes as a whole. So therefore you need people to have it. And like I said, many countries who don't have that are now trying to get immigrants in. First, they were saying, oh, get all these Muslims out, get all these immigrants out. Now they're like, oh, come, please come in. We want you to come in. Secondly, sustainable welfare, like I mentioned before. How do you sustain looking after the elderly? This is a big issue for some countries, whereby they're actually even employing foreigners, even foreign Muslim countries, to become as maids and workers, care workers for the elderly. That's another irony. Another one is cultural preservation. Another very, very important aspect, because if you look at it from an Islamic perspective. And when I say culture, I weave within that Islam, because as Muslims, culture is within our Islam is woven within our culture. And if you want people to accept Islam, that comes in part with accepting the culture of Islam. How do you propagate Islam? One way can you propagate Islam? You can do that by increasing numbers. The more people you have, the more likelihood people will adopt it, just by sheer number, because human beings, gravitate towards the majority. So that's another benefit. Another one, national security. That's an obvious one, to be honest. Obviously, the more people you have, the more you have to defend your nation. That's another very important point. And this is another, next point is a very, very, very subtlety that people don't realize. Technology and development and innovation. Let's just assume only 1% of the population does something innovative and new and beneficial, or some kind of new science or whatnot. Only 1%. 1% of 30 million is not the same as 1% of 1 million. So clearly, having more people will increase the probability of advancing your society, advancing others. And that 1% can actually invent something new that will carry the rest of the whole ummah. Imagine a Muslim country with millions of people in there, loads, so many people, but one of those 1% managed to invent a new battery, changes the world, changes everything. That one person actually carried the whole nation. By sheer chance of that, because you have so much more, there's more probability of that happening. These are some of the benefits of having more people. And I think these are one of the almost the asrar, one of the secrets, hikam, wisdoms of why the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged us to have more children, and why Allah Himself encouraged us not to look at our children as a burden, and promised us and took up kafala, said, no, don't worry about it. Have the children. I will take responsibility of providing for you and them. This is a very important piece, inshallah.
Jazakallah for sharing that with us. A very, very interesting episode.
Jazakallah khair.
And also for the viewers for tuning in. And inshallah, join us the same time, same place next week, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.